It's safe to say that one of the most influential and most successful writers of all time is a certain author by the name Agatha Christie. You may have heard of her. Yes, the so-called Queen of Crime is a very popular figure from the literature world, so it's little surprise that she became the target of one of Doctor Who's so-called celebrity historicals. Episodes that see the protagonist team up with a famous face from history for hijinks to ensue. The idea of a Christie-centric story came about as early as 2006 and was even hinted at in Last of the Time Lords.
I know, what about Agatha Christie? I'd love to meet Agatha Christie, but she's brilliant.
Showrunner Russell T Davies decided to assign this adventure to the same writer who wrote the Shakespeare Code the previous year, who was also a big Agatha Christie fan, meaning the resulting story, The Unicorn and the Wasp, was very referential to the works of the Queen of Crime, even being directly based on Crooked House, along with many other inspirations throughout, because it takes the very obvious step of being a murder mystery, not too dissimilar to Season 19's Black Orchid, except this time with a giant wasp. So does this episode provide a fun, comedic romp, along with a good sci-fi explanation for Christie's mysterious 1926 disappearance? Or are these cards better left on the table with the body in the library of the Orient Express? See what I did there with the book titles? Yeah, I hate it too, but the episode itself does it a lot worse. It truly makes you wish there were none.
No, don't do that. Don't.
It's really interesting to note that one of the first things we hear in the episode is the sound of a wasp buzzing as the Doctor and Donna exit the TARDIS. It's ever so subtle, but if you listen closely, you can hear it. It's good for establishing that idea of the wasp from very early on, just kind of hinting at it very subliminally and making you think about it, along with being simple diegetic background noise to create an immersive, realistic atmosphere, the sound of the countryside really coming through. There's also a great short exchange between the two characters as the Doctor shows off his ability to tell exactly what decade they're in just from the smell, before Donna quickly points out the vintage car that serves the same purpose. This is brilliant for them both. In terms of the Doctor, it shows how intelligent and experienced the character is with time travel. They fly around space and time so often that it's pretty much expected for them to know exactly when and where they are from the get-go. We've seen similar knowledge with immediately identifying aliens such as the Jadoon and Carrionites, but this is a new aspect to further show their age and ability, along with continuing the characterization of the 10th Doctor as being a bit of a show-off who likes to make a scene. And in terms of Donna, it shows her rational thinking, not needing to do big brain internal calculations by checking the air or smell. She just has to use her eyes and common sense, because that's who she is as a person, so very human. It's moments like these that show why they're such a good duo, because they fill in the gaps for each other. The Doctor does all the fancy alien technobabble, and Donna adds her humanity to the mix to help him see the stuff he's overlooking. It's why the Doctor-Donna works so well in the finale, since Donna becomes the personification of that combination, being both these aspects in one singular person. So these kinds of exchanges are great for setting that plot point up in very subtle ways. Donna then even changes into a period costume, something I always appreciate, as it makes an episode easier to digest and buy into, so you don't end up questioning why someone in like the 16th century wouldn't be curious about a leather jacket and jeans. I just always think it adds credibility to the setting. You see it in episodes like Unquiet Dead and Thin Ice, making them more visually interesting because there's an extra effort put in to immerse the viewer, making the setting so real. This authenticity continues with the cocktail party and the recurring gag of the companion trying a bit too hard to fit in, topping off a trilogy started in Tooth and Claw and finishing here. I just like touches like this, short jokes that come up in multiple episodes to create a sense of familiarity.
Topping down, what? Spiffing. Top hell.
I think this is what they call a running gag.
And speaking of posh accents, we then get some of that glorious 1920s poshness as we meet Professor Peach and Reverend Golightly. The setting immediately feels authentic with these accents and aesthetics, along with the murder mystery theme established very early on, finding out this character is named Professor Peach, a name straight out of Cluedo, in which the corresponding character is Professor Plum. I feel like with an episode like this, you definitely need to get this atmosphere established as soon as possible. It's an Agatha Christie murder mystery, so you need to get to the meat of it straight away. There's no time for dilly-dallying, so I appreciate that Peach is killed in the study by the titular wasp with a lead pipe, just as he seems to solve an important mystery. Again, it's like Cluedo, and, well, any kind of murder mystery. There has to be an initial death to kickstart the events, and this is it, with it being especially on brand for the genre.
Hold on. The body in the library. I mean, Professor Peach in the library with the lead piping.
I also think it's very on brand for us to unknowingly meet the killer straight away, since it eventually turns out to have been Reverend Golightly all along. It's smart storytelling, giving you the answers from the very beginning without you actually knowing. It's common for the murderer or the criminal to be introduced very early on to almost bait the audience, so murder mystery fans will be able to work it out immediately, rather than it being too sudden and out of the blue like some murder mysteries often do. In keeping with this murder mystery theme, we then get a sequence of meeting all the supporting characters, them being introduced one by one in a similar vein to the end of the world, which, funnily enough, was also a bit of a murder mystery, although a bit different. Sometimes unabashed exposition like this can be pretty grating to experience, but I think the Unicorn and the Wasp does it in a good way. It's a high class party, so it's believable that each person would get introduced in this fashion, meeting the other guests and being introduced to one another, their key attributes and character motivations being explained straight away to give you a sense of exactly who they are as living, breathing people. There's also a nice veil of fakeness about the scene, everyone clearly being a bit too chipper and polite to one another. You can definitely tell there's some reluctant friendliness in some of these interactions, and that these people are cautious because of all the skeletons in their respective closets. However, then we meet the woman herself, none other than famous, celebrated crime author Agatha Christie, who is a really fun first interaction with our main duo.
Agatha Christie.
What about her?
That's me. No.
I think it makes perfect sense to combine the Doctor and Agatha Christie, because they're very similar characters. Like the Doctor instantly knowing where they are, Agatha instantly notices the lack of wedding rings on the duo to flex her knowledge and detective skills, along with continuing that running misconception of the Doctor and Donna being a couple. Fenella Woolgar is perfectly cast as the writer. You immediately buy into her portrayal as if she is the real deal. However, then we get the real kicker. We find out she's only 6 books into her illustrious career, and the Doctor notices it's the exact day she mysteriously vanished for a few days, only to come back with no memory of her absence. I've spoken before about this mystery being the perfect breeding ground for a Doctor Who story, but it really is. It's such a good historical anomaly to throw into the mix on top of the normal murder mystery, this new layer to keep the Doctor invested before the murders even begin. It's a mystery he knows all about, but for once doesn't actually know the answer to.
I knows exactly what happened, she just vanished.
However, because the Doctor is indeed the great detective, when Professor Peach is found dead in the study, he quickly springs into action to look for clues and hints, like the Professor's watch being stopped at the time of death, even noticing when Agatha herself takes some evidence for her own investigation. This scene is again good for characterising the Doctor, because he takes charge straight away and stamps his authority on the surrounding people. You see it in most episodes, the character just taking over and running the show themselves, since they're the smartest person in the room and crave this kind of situation. They know better than the others, so they take control. It's the kind of moment that gets paid off in Midnight, where he gets called out and attacked for being so eagerly involved like this. I also like that Donna is the one to bring attention to the convenient nature of the death, along with Agatha Christie's presence. It's that observation I made earlier, the idea of it being set up as a very traditional murder mystery, almost too traditional. Because Donna has that human touch, she's able to see how eerily convenient it all is, how it's almost too fitting for this situation to occur in this context, a big mystery that just so happens to occur at a party with Agatha Christie herself. The Doctor would never notice that, but Donna is able to fill the gap, providing this invaluable clue for the ending, since it turns out the deaths being like this are a conscious choice by Golightly, who had the works of Christie beamed into his mind through sci-fi shenanigans. There are also some wonderful interactions between the main duo here, like Donna accidentally referencing the Unquiet Dead as a joke, only to find out it actually happened. Charles Dickens really did meet the Doctor to fight ghosts at Christmas, although sadly Noddy isn't real, unless you're in the land of fiction. They're such a dynamic duo, bouncing off each other so well and always adding a nice sense of levity to their predicaments. I actually think it's quite similar to how the Doctor and Rose were so jokey and light-hearted in Tooth and Claw, not taking things seriously enough, but this time the Doctor is called out on it by Agatha. I like this because a man has just been murdered, a horrific turn of events, but the Doctor is just cracking jokes and being excited about it all, blind to the humanity of the situation, too blunted to know the weight of the developments and how it affects others. The two detectives start to question all the suspects for leads, as often happens in this situation, because what would be a crime crime story without hunting for leads. This is a very solid and enjoyable sequence to achieve a similar effect as the cocktails on the lawn, since it establishes those character beats and motivations. We see how every character is lying about what they were doing at the time of the murder, all of them up to no good or with more skeletons in their closet than a Halloween monster party. It's a creative and quickfire way of showing their character traits and motivations, such as Lady Edison, who is hitting the bottle instead of having tea, or Robina Redmond, who has a revolver ready. None of them have alibis for the time of death, all able to make up fabricated stories because there's nobody to contradict them, stumping the Doctor and Agatha and seemingly leaving them with no proper leads. However, a little touch I really appreciate is that Golightly's flashback is the only one that seems to actually corroborate the alibi provided. Unlike the others, who are hiding something their personal flashback exposes, he claims to have been unpacking alone in his room, which the flashback indeed communicates without a hint of deception. I think this is a great detail since he is the killer, so like him being one of the first people we meet, this makes him suspicious and fishy because he's the odd one out here. It draws attention to him in a unique way, because he's almost too normal, seemingly the only one without anything to hide. It makes him seem so innocent that he's guilty, something you would only really pick up on with the hindsight of finding out it was him the whole time.
It's me, Austin! It was me all along, Austin!
Whilst these interviews are happening, Donna heads off on her own investigation, coming across a mysterious locked room Lady Edison spent 6 months alone in with malaria. It's another good mystery, just for Donna to find a massive wasp ready to kill her for snooping around. This is so very Doctor Who. It's such a simple, almost comedic idea of, what if we take a simple wasp and make it a human-sized alien? It's an impressive visual though, and I don't even think the CGI looks that dated, it holds up fairly well. There's such a surreal feeling to it, even the Doctor in disbelief of Donna's claims that there's this giant wasp on the loose, although he does know about giant insectoid monsters in the universe, especially because he's had run-ins with ones like the Wirren. It's another good moment to show the character's universal knowledge, along with how alien they are. All the technobabble and talk of aliens means Agatha ascertains the Doctor is off his rocker. Remember, this is 1926, they aren't exactly going to believe that aliens exist just yet, they're still a while off from embracing those kinds of concepts. Even Christie, who is a popular author with infinite imagination, can't come to terms with the possibility of alien lifeforms or a man like the Doctor with so much knowledge about the universe, so she's a really effective outside presence, like the celebrity historical figure usually is. However, before the trio can search for more clues, a gargoyle slowly falls on Chandrakala. I always find this death a bit goofy and borderline funny, because she has plenty of time to stand there and scream as it falls, instead of, stepping to the side so it doesn't kill her. I know it's a reference to And Then They Were None, but it's still a bit ridiculous to see unfold. And to tick even more cliches off the list, she even has the typical dramatic vague final words, dying just before she can say, "Oh yeah, it's the Reverend, he's secretly a giant wasp." Because, that would make it a bit too easy. However, there's a good chase out of it, ending with that brilliant shot of every suspect coming out of their rooms all at once. It's a simple moment to further show how badly this investigation is going, and how they basically have nothing to go on because it could still be anyone. And here's where I insert the Among Us meme, because if I don't do it, someone in the comments will. Throughout the episode, there are a number of not so subtle references to Agatha Christie books such as Cat Among the Pigeons and They Do It With Mirrors, but the least subtle line by far is this one.
Jen put with death instead.
Yeah, that one is about as much of a wink and a nudge as being pushed off a balcony. It kinda reminds me of how Horror of Glam Rock constantly references songs.
Trisha told me all I want to do is help.
Oi, Doctor, leave them kids alone.
Hey, at least they decided against referencing 10 Little Lovecraft Cats, the original title of And Then They Were None. That would have been a complete disaster no matter how they spun it. Despite a bunch of these references being forced into the episode as a writer's bet, this ends up being a good scene as they all turn to Agatha, expecting her to solve the mystery because of her novels, but she can't. She's only human after all. I like this approach. People hold celebrities up to a pedestal, and the characters in this episode are no different, holding Christie to this standard because of her books, but at the end of the day, she's just like them. She goes through the same trials and tribulations as anyone else. She's no more special than the other characters, so I like how she crumbles under the responsibility they're thrusting upon her. She's not a detective, she just writes them. There's also that really touching scene where she explains how she doubts herself. She doesn't think her books are good literature. I really relate to this sense of doubt and so-called imposter syndrome. always downplaying yourself because you can't see how you're successful. You feel like it's a fluke or hollow. She doesn't think her books will last, which is similar to how Vincent van Gogh would later be characterised in Vincent and the Doctor. As I said, people hold these figures up so high, but a lot of these figures have no idea they'll leave a legacy, so it's really good that this idea is explored with Agatha firmly expecting her books to be forgotten, especially with the ending of the episode. It's not quite as sad as Vincent, because this is still early in her career, so she went on to have an illustrious writing career while still alive, but the emotion is still there in the moment. She's vulnerable, and I appreciate that Donna tries to comfort her by relating to her relationship struggles, able to recall her own experience with Lance in The Runaway Bride. It's good because she's able to call on these Doctor Who adventures to help others, knowing that there's always someone out there like the Doctor who can help lift anyone's spirits and give them a reason to love life. However, the Doctor almost loses his life seconds later. As our protagonists find a clue suggesting the infamous thief the Unicorn is in their midst, the Doctor gets poisoned by cyanide. Or as the episode says, sparkling cyanide. Because, get it? It's a reference to one of her books. This leads to a really frantic and chaotically comedic sequence of him trying to reverse the poison, having to desperately play charades with Donna to get what he needs. This is a much loved scene, and I definitely understand why. It's just simple fun. It lets Tennant and Tate flex their comedic chops well, no goofy music needed to make it entertaining or engaging. There's just enough substance there to make the scene work, but it also doesn't outstay its welcome. It doesn't drag on or beat the jokes into the ground. It's a way of keeping that very light-hearted tone of the episode. The scene is delightfully wacky and funny, not devolving into silly walks or silly voices, and somehow manages to turn this tense moment of the Doctor on the verge of death into this entertaining sequence with all sort of food and sarcasm flying around, perfectly balancing that seriousness and levity of the episode in one singular scene, essentially becoming a vertical slice of the episode. You have the Doctor playing a deadly game of charades with Donna and Agatha Christie, which really just kind of sums up the entire nature of the episode, in my opinion. Then, as tends to happen, a storm breaks out during dinner, because what would a good murder mystery be without a bit of thunder and lightning? The Doctor sums up the events of the day and takes the bold step of poisoning the guests with pepper, to try and draw out the Wasp, because it won't hurt the humans, but it will hurt the Wasp. This is a smart Uno reverse card, the Doctor weaponising his scientific mind, only for it to work almost too well, the Wasp striking again to kill Roger in the chaos of the storm. This is important because any good murder mystery needs a few kills throughout to keep the pace going strong. It continues the Christie-centric atmosphere of the story, this murder in the flash of darkness at dinner. The kills are all reminiscent of her novels, and this is another way to show that, one of the most recognisable styles of death in this genre. But now the Doctor himself turns to Christie to ask her to solve the mystery. Everyone else had asked her, but now he is too, because he finally realises how important she is. The others were focusing on her detective skills, but he works out her true strengths are her understanding of characters, always crafting the perfect motive with this command of character writing. It's another good way to involve her in the episode, not unlike Shakespeare being heavily involved in the Carrier-Knight's plan through his inventive wordcraft. Celebrity historicals like this can sometimes fall into the trap of underutilising the central figure, not really justifying them being in the story, but this episode goes out of its way to make sure she's a core focus with an impact. She goes from person to person, first exposing Robina as the Unicorn, who has just had a fake accent this entire time, because as we all know, there's no such thing as a posh jewel thief. They have to have a typical common London accent, because you know, only poor people are criminals. To be honest, for an episode called The Unicorn and the Wasp, I'm not exactly sure what the Unicorn really has to do with the story. Robina is such a minor character, and this reveal is kind of pointless because she has no real importance to the plot, besides being after the Firestone, which is kind of just fine on its own. If you take her out of the episode, nothing changes, because she's not at all related to the murders, just a shoehorned in second mystery that shows how the characters aren't who they seem. Indeed, as we've seen throughout, everyone has their own secrets and aren't who they first appear to be. This also goes for Colonel Kirbishley, who reveals he doesn't actually need the wheelchair after all. He just faked his Spanish flu injury so he could keep Lady Edison and not lose her to another man as he grew old. Kind of a manipulative move when you ask me. I think this is a better pointless twist than the Unicorn one. Again, there's no real bearing to the plot other than just showing everyone has a secret, but at least this hadn't been whispered about and set up throughout for no reason. It's just a good small twist to whet your appetite and show how many deceptions there are. It even leads to a good comedic moment because Kirbishley admits to it without Christie even accusing him of anything. She was actually going to clear him. I think this hasty confession shows not only how riddled with guilt he is, but also how highly these people regard Agatha. They know how good she is with mystery, so by this point he expects her to have cottoned onto him, simply because of the reputation he and other fans of her books have created for her. And indeed, her detective skills are good, because she connects the dots regarding Edison's mysterious locked room, working out she had secretly given birth upon her return from India, exposing this family secret of her bastard child, a secret so hidden even Kirbishley didn't know about it. This moment is where the Doctor and Christie combine, his alien knowledge benefiting from her detective skills, as he gets Edison to admit to the child being that of a Vesper form, the name for the giant alien wasp we've seen cropping up throughout. Yes, it turns out that when Lady Edison was in India as a young woman, she had a passionate fling with Christopher Waspman over here, leading to her secret pregnancy and bastard child. This son development is a very Agatha Christie style twist, but it feels weird to me because it just kind of happens. This son flashback after a trip to India had only been mentioned once. If they'd had a bit more dialogue about her hinting towards India being important, it would have worked a lot better, but it just seems to come at a strange time here. However, I do like the bombshell of Lady Edison's love for Christie books being the reason for the events of the episode. Because Donna is that human side of the Doctor, her constant observations of the incidents being lifted straight from those books allow him to connect the pieces, tipping him off to the truth, using one of the earliest pieces of dialogue to reveal Reverend Golightly as the child.
You apprehended them, I hear.
As the Christian fathers taught me, we must forgive them their trespasses.
Similarly to him being one of the first people we meet, I like that one of his first lines is the smoking gun the Doctor needs to expose him. It again appeals to those detectives in the audience, having these important clues from so early on. Golightly having attacked the boys rather than apprehending them as he claimed, and the Firestone carrying the Agatha Christie plots into his mind as it beamed his Vesper form identity into him. It's all very Doctor Who, but I'm not sure I like him being so openly evil and malicious. The Doctor says that Golightly kills this way because it's what he thinks the world is like, and I really like this concept. They could have gone with him being almost infantile, and not knowing about the world he's suddenly living in, just killing out of not knowing any better. However, instead of this more interesting route, they just make him typically evil, without any shades of grey. I don't really like this direction because it's too basic. The Firestone only activated a week earlier, so Golightly's Vesper form identity is still young. It wouldn't have had much of a chance to become accustomed to our world. It's a big missed opportunity for nuance in the villain's motivations. There's no sympathetic or understandable motive like being an infant who's protective of his mother. He's pretty much just evil for the sake of being evil. We then get a chase scene as Agatha drives the Vesper form away from the house, the Doctor having to flex those old driving skills he hasn't used for a while. I quite enjoy this climax. There are good stakes because of the establishment she could genuinely die here if the Doctor and Donna don't stop it. As he says, time is in flux. This isn't a fixed point like Pompeii. This is one of those many adventures where time can be changed. However, it's also one of those moments that make the whole fixed and flux thing confusing. I can understand Pompeii being fixed because that just makes a lot of sense. But the Doctor has read all of Agatha Christie's books. She lived a very important and influential life, so surely her timeline would also be somewhat fixed. However, instead of dying, Christie baits the Vesper form with the Firestone, just for Donna to yeet it into the lake to kill the Wasp.
How'd you kill a wasp? Drown it.
This death was seeded quite smartly, because in Lady Edison's flashback she explained that Christopher drowned in the monsoon, so Donna remembers that and uses it to kill Golightly, weaponising his connection with the stone. I do like the moral question of her killing him in this way, because he knew no better and was acting on instinct. However, this ethical question would be much better with that alternate motivation I suggested a minute ago. They made him seem a little bit too evil at the end, so it doesn't really feel as though he was blindly following his genetic programming. Although I do like the redemption as he lets Agatha go, an attempt to make up for all the pain and death he caused in her name. We then find out why Agatha Christie disappeared for 11 days, because it turns out that when the Vesper form died, it wiped her memory of the day and the time-travelling duo, who were the ones to drop her off at the Harrogate Hotel. I honestly really like this explanation because it's such a Doctor Who concept. It's such a significant historical mystery, something nobody knows even to this day. So there are infinite ideas to play with, and I think only Doctor Who would have the wackiness to make it the result of a shape-shifting alien wasp obsessed with the works of Agatha Christie. I just love how creative it gets with the mystery, including a convenient memory wipe so she doesn't have to remember the alien events. I do also appreciate that they address why the surviving characters never admitted to the truth of this wild night. Christie had her mind wiped, but Edison and the other characters simply have too much pride pride and self-importance to expose the truth. Lady Edison kept the secret of her child for over 40 years, and the other characters kept their own secrets, so what's one more skeleton in the closet? Admitting to the truth of what happened would be social suicide. Remember, this is 1926. They can't handle the concept of aliens, so coming out and saying Agatha Christie went missing because of a massive wasp would be a quick way to get yourself ostracised and probably sectioned too. It's a potentially massive plot hole they managed to prevent with such a simple explanation, so I really like it. I also like the very final scene. Donna's still dwelling on Agatha's doubt about her legacy. I appreciate her being so hung up on this. Yes, the day has been saved and the timeline restored, but Donna still knows what Agatha thinks about herself. That crippling sense of inferiority and self-consciousness about her career. Donna just wishes Agatha could be happy, so I like that the Doctor reassures her that she was, along with him whipping out a copy of Death in the Clouds to show how the memory of a giant wasp survived in the back of her mind, along with Miss Marple's existence showing Donna's impact on the writer. Although, if Donna knew Miss Marple, went back and inspired the creation because Agatha Christie didn't know what Miss Marple was, who wrote the original Miss Marple?
Who really composed Beethoven's Fifth?
Also, because the Doctor couldn't exactly take Agatha to the year 5 billion to show her a library of all of her books, I like how the copy of Death in the Clouds is from that year, hammering home her influence and importance to literature in the world, along with setting up a library in the next episode. Nobody has any idea how long their legacy will last, but this is a really optimistic moment to reassure Donna how successful Christie truly is, outlasting all of us because her work is that significant. Even the existence of the episode itself is a testament to this, because her works inspired so many adaptations, parodies, and spin-offs that she can never truly be forgotten anymore. The Doctor's line about her possibly being a better writer because of her imposter syndrome is also spot on. As he implies, if you know you're the best at something, what would be the point in continuing? Christie feeling like her books weren't true literature in turn caused her to improve and make them so, because it lights a fire underneath you and gives you a sense of competition, constantly moving the goalposts in a productive and positive way. I just think it's a nice ending message, saying you shouldn't allow yourself to think too much about your legacy. You should just hope and strive for your best, because that's all you can do. As someone who doesn't really care for celebrity historicals, I would probably say Unicorn and the Wasp is one of the better episodes of the genre, although it's still one of the weakest Series 4 stories, capping off the somewhat mediocre trilogy of stories a lot of people are apathetic towards. However, there are definitely a lot of things to like about it. The setting is both authentic and brilliantly imaginative, creating a very unique and creative story based on a mysterious event in Agatha Christie's life. Christie herself is characterised and cast incredibly well, fitting the plot perfectly and serving a really crucial role in the events of the episode, not getting lost in the crowd or being surplus requirements. The mystery itself is pretty well written, creating this simple murder mystery with lots of fun twists and turns along the way to keep the viewer invested and entertained, thanks to all these wild secrets that come out. However, there are a few places where the episode falls short, like the involvement of the unicorn and some minor things here and there. This means I'd probably place it as a C on the Series 4 tier list, but that's mainly because of the quality in the rest of the series. When weighted against those, it comes out that low, but it's still a pretty enjoyable and fun episode. It's kind of carried by the performances of David Tennant and Catherine Tate, because the humour of the episode is its strongest point, the pair perfectly delivering some excellently written jokes.
He's just struck again, snatched Lady Babington's pearls right from under her nose. Funny place to wear pearl.
The levity is much appreciated because it would have otherwise been very hard to take the plot seriously, because of, well, everything about it. It's not a story that sets out to be some grand introspective exploration of a theme. It doesn't try to come out with some kind of commentary about the shame of early unmarried motherhood or being an orphan child. It just decides to put the Doctor and Donna in a fun setting with an interesting plot and enjoyable murder mystery romp, which is what you need sometimes, something simple and fun. But the biggest downside is that it was written by a human thumb. And I'd like to give a very special thank you to my gold level patrons: Alex Marston, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Lime Vortex, John, and Stephanie Never Miller. Thank you so much for your support.